Okay, our next speaker is going to be Kathleen Johnson. She's the Vice President of American Atheists and has served American Atheists as an activist since 1997. She previously held the position of Military Director for American Atheists, a position she helped create to help American Atheists better serve and assist the military population and engage in military-related activism. Y'all give her a hand.
This is going to work without me holding the mic. I'm not sure. I'm maybe not too tall for this podium. Can you hear me?
No.
We'll do this. All right, good morning and thank you for having me here today. You want to know how I know there is no God? Because I ended up sandwiched between Aaron Ra and Matt Dillahunty today. That's how I know there is no God. The only thing that would have made it worse is if I'd been right after Jerry DeWitt. That's the only thing that would have made it worse. Before I get started, as I was sitting over there, my sisters know I'm not an accomplished public speaker like some of the other speakers are here today, so they know I'm nervous. And they were sending me some text messages to cheer me up before I went on. My sister Jenny sent this gem. It was posted on her Facebook page by one of her Facebook friends. Her Facebook friends says, I'm studying DNA, gene expression, biotechnology, chromosomes, and cell division for biology. Science makes me see how truly magnificent God is and how much love and thought He put into structuring us and living life forms. Wow. My other sister, you gotta keep in mind, my sisters fall somewhere on the spectrum between deist and agnostic. They haven't quite come over all the way, but I'm getting them there. And then, my other sister sent this little gem. She says, you're with atheists and I'm with Dad at gospel karaoke. And then she says, please, I wish somebody would just shoot me. So even though I'm a nervous public speaker, she's having a much worse day than I am with my dad at godless karaoke. Anyway, I'm very happy to be invited to speak at East Texas's very first secular convention, especially since, although I'm Vice President of American Atheists and our headquarters is in New Jersey, I actually live in a one-stoplight town in Central Texas, and I earn my living not from the atheist movement, but from working full-time right here in Texas. I live in the tiny town of Kempner, which I guarantee none of you have ever heard of. We have one traffic light that's exactly 24 months old, and we've only had the ability to buy beer within the city limits for 12 months. When I give directions to my house, this is a true story, I tell people to make a right turn at the pot-bellied pig. I mention this because I really do understand what it's like to live life as a Texas atheist, and as one who's based outside of Austin, where things tend to be a little more civilized for our community. If there's time at the end, I'll tell you a couple of other little quick anecdotes about my life here in small town, as a small town Texas atheist. I'm also a veteran, which she mentioned, and I would like to give a shout out to any members of the military and veterans who may be here, especially my friends who came down from the Military Association of Atheists and Free Thinkers, from the chapters in my neck of the woods, and the San Antonio crew and spaces in between. I'm also not a professional public speaker. I rarely blog, I don't podcast, rarely podcast, I rarely tweet, and I don't have a YouTube channel, being that I'm much more comfortable in my behind-the-scenes role as Vice President of American Atheists and as a member of the Board of Directors. I can't even claim to be the power behind the throne because I'm pretty sure that title goes to Amanda Knief, and I would not dare dispute it because I'm pretty sure she could take me in a fair fight. I don't know how to tell jokes, and if I ever had to get into a verbal contest with the speakers who have preceded me, I am pretty sure they would hand my fourth point of contact to me. You guys know what a fourth point of contact is? It's a paratrooper term when you're coming in from a landing. First it's the feet, then it's the calves, then it's the thighs, then it's the fourth point of contact. They would hand me my fourth point of contact. My PowerPoint presentations are boring, and since I have a military-based phobia of death by PowerPoint and of PowerPoint failure, which are unkindly reinforced for me, I'm not using it. If there's a time, and I suspect there will be, I'll take questions at the end. and you'll be able to ask anything you like without regards to staying on topic. My talk is titled Sex in the Military City. I am well aware this is a family-friendly event and we have some young people in the audience, so I will keep this PG-ish. I do need to give a trigger warning though. I will be talking about some uncomfortable topics in the second half, including touching on the sex assault problem in the military. And even though this will be discussed in a non-graphic PG sort of way, it's entirely possible that the content might be disturbing to some. But I'm not going to transition to that till the second half, and I'll let you know when I'm going to that part of the talk. I do not have a background in any science or social science that qualifies me to research or speak on this topic. What I do have is almost 30 years experience in military law, including a background in investigating and collecting and documentation pertaining to allegations of assaults of all types, including sex assaults and hate crimes. Since my experience has been exclusively with the Army, the incidents I will discuss will come almost entirely from the Army, but I suspect that much of what I'm going to say can be extrapolated out to the other services as well. First half of the talk, a little more positive spin than the second half. During my military and civilian careers with the Army, I still work for the Army, even though I retired in 2008, I still work for the Army as a civilian. One area that has seen a tremendous amount of change is with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the ability for homosexual troops to serve openly in the military. That's a good thing. I firmly believe that's a good thing. We are not all the way where we need to be, and that we still discriminate against the transgendered. But this is one area where at least we can see some positive progress is being made. To let you know how far we've come, well, for one thing, there's a reason why this should be of importance to non-service members who are secularists like yourselves. It has been well established that when you cut through all the nonsense excuses that people like to spout when they try to describe their reasons why homosexuals should be excluded from doing anything, at the root of those reasons, it's always down to their religious beliefs. Religions of many types, including the big powerhouse here in the United States, Christianity, actively teaches that homosexuals are intentional sinners who deserve to die for their supposed crime of loving somebody of the same gender. Early in my career, I came in and enlisted in '84. I shipped to basic training in '85. Early in my career, the Army implemented this discrimination by investigating and even imprisoning suspected homosexuals. This is as recently as the '80s and early '90s. When I first joined the military in the 1980s, one of the Criminal Investigations Division's jobs was to identify and investigate so-called homosexual rings where suspected gay men or lesbians would be identified, sometimes via unscrupulous or questionable means. They would be identified, held, interrogated, sometimes for hours on end, and pressured to name other gangs in their ring, which usually would come after hours of interrogation and pressure. In those days, investigators were under pressure to produce so-called confessions and would use any legal and maybe quasi-legal technique necessary, to the point that sometimes non-gays would make an admission that indicated they might be gay just to end the harassment. Keep in mind also that it was official policy then that homosexuals be identified and discharged. But where they got trapped and where the imprisonment came in was because the military listed sodomy as a felony crime. And the military defined sodomy as anything other than traditional face-to-face intercourse between a man and a woman. Whether homosexual, heterosexual, whatever it happened to be, that was sodomy. And it remained a felony in military law until just this past December. That's December 2013, that it remained a felony under military law. Then later, under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, we stopped the witch hunts and the jailing, but we started automatically discharging anybody who claimed or was suspected of being gay, regardless of how much money had been spent on their training and the valuable skills that we would be losing. And today, things still are not perfect because we still allow the VA to deny full benefits to same-sex spouses, but they're better. It's getting better. And meanwhile, none of the predictions the religious right trotted out came true. We are more than 3 years past into a post-repeal military, and what do you know? Unit cohesion wasn't damaged. Sexual assaults, while still a major problem, did not exponentially increase because of this. No one's safety was put at risk. Our combat effectiveness was not harmed. And there weren't roving gangs of gay service people trying to take pictures of straight people in the showers, which is one of the things that was going around. And now, of course, these same arguments are being trotted out in defense of the ban against transgendered persons serving. But at the root, we know what's really going on. The Christian majority thinks the transgendered are on the same highway to hell as the gays and the atheists, and they simply don't want to see equal rights and access extended to persons that they despise. All right. Part 2, get into the other area that the trigger warning applied to. Now I'd like to discuss a second serious topic on which not nearly enough progress has been made: the prevention of sexual assault within the military. Great progress has been made in the investigation of sexual assault, with the implementation of special victims units and the hiring of forensic nurses to collect sex assault evidence kits. Less progress has been made in the areas of prosecution because there is no standard for prosecution, because prosecutorial decisions are not made by lawyers and legal people. They're left in the hands of unit commanders. Sometimes the same person who will be the commander of both the subject and the victim. And these are not legal professionals. And even worse progress has been made in efforts to prevent sexual assault. In spite of the implementation of countless variations of mandatory training, sex assaults still occur. Disturbing random factoid. During my own deployment to Iraq, which occurred during the surge period of 2006 to 2007, not 1 week went by without a service member being sexually assaulted in that combat theater. Not 1 week for the entire year that I was there. During my time in Iraq, the biggest threat to female service members was other service members. It was not combat. I do want to be clear, however, when I talk about the military sex assault problem, I'm not exclusively talking about female victims, unless I specifically say it. Out in the world, men are victims of sex assault, and that's very much true in the military too. And there have been some pretty decent studies that indicate male victim sexual assault in the military is vastly underreported, and that the resources set up to help sex assault victims are not being taken advantage of by male victims. However, because female victim sexual assaults are reported so much more often, that's where I draw most of my data from. That's where most of my data points come from. I also know, believe me, that women can be offenders too. But in my personal experience, which is where I'm drawing data from, I have access to things I have personal experience with. I've actually never personally encountered a female subject in a military sexual assault. So I'm drawing my data mostly from male to female, and then at least one male to male sex assault. You might be asking why this topic is important to secularists like us who are not associated with the military for the most part. I'm working on the hypothesis that the sexual assault problem with preventing and responding to sexual assault that continues to stain the honor of military service have a religious discrimination component at their core. It is my hypothesis that the mostly Christian religious commanders make their prosecutorial decisions not only from the facts of the case, or not even especially from the facts of the case, they make it from their religious biases that tell them that victims bring their sex assaults upon themselves by their own behavior, and that their religiously based homophobia likewise taints their ability to properly adjudicate male victim cases. And I'm going to throw out a couple of case examples. You have a female victim. She comes in to report that she was at a party in the barracks. These are true cases that I'm relaying here. There'll be no names associated with them. I've removed a lot of identifying details, but these are true cases. She doesn't remember much of the evening due to extreme alcohol consumption to the point where she passed out. She had no idea what happened, but she had the vague feeling that something had happened. Something just didn't seem right. From the moment she walked in and started talking to investigators, the work started to discredit her and her story. when her actions, including the actions of simply being there and consuming alcohol, were pulled under scrutiny. Investigators ultimately concluded that no crime occurred other than the crime she committed by being a civilian in the barracks and consuming alcohol under the age of 21. She was 19 or 20, the way I recall it. 2 days later, someone who lived in those same barracks came forward out of his own guilty conscience, and he had a camera. He had a digital camera. He said he had been in the barracks, his roommate had taken pictures, he had his roommate's camera, and he brought the camera in. I'm not going to go into detail what was on the camera because this is kind of a PG talk, but what was on the camera was a horror show. What happened to this woman when she was unconscious was a horror. I'll let your imaginations fill in the rest, but it was a horror. There were eventually criminal charges, but those criminal charges never came to trial because the commander elected not to go forward with a prosecution. The subjects were eventually discharged from the Army, but they were never tried for any crime, because when this particular commander considered this case, he gave equal weight to the fact that the victim was in the barracks without authorization, was dressed in going out wear, had voluntarily gone to the party, and had voluntarily consumed alcohol, as he did to the fact that this lady was clearly extensively victimized by more than one subject. The commander in this incident was well known in the community for his involvement in his church and his religious activities. It is my hypothesis that this commander's decisions were, at least in part, significantly motivated by his religious beliefs. Here's another example. Female soldier reports that she was accosted by a male co-worker, not to the point of rape, but was grabbed around the neck, pushed into her barracks room, and pounded into a wall locker. There's reason to think that if it had gone farther, easily have been raped. The assault was accidentally interrupted when a supervisor saw the door to her barracks room open, heard something going on, and stopped it before the rape, which probably would have occurred, could have actually occurred. No formal criminal investigation was conducted in this case because the female soldier was determined in a commander's investigation to be polyamorous. She was married. Both her husband and herself were polyamorous. It was a completely consensual arrangement between her husband, and her partner and his partner. Her partner was a warrant officer in the service, and she was junior enlisted, which is a violation of regulations in the military for officers and enlisted to be involved in a relationship. So she was investigated, punished, and separated from the service for fraternization, because it's a military-specific offense. And while she was going through this separation and punishment process, her would-be rapist was allowed to stalk, harass, and intimidate her right up until the point she was discharged. And when she complained, she was told by her commander she brought it on herself due to her immoral conduct. Again, it is my hypothesis that all decision-making in this incident was motivated by religious biases. I'll throw out one more incident. A male victim sexual assault. This is a male victim sexual assault case in which the victim reported he woke up in the middle of the night and found his roommate performing an unwanted sexual act upon him. After an investigation, again conducted locally by the commander and not by an investigative agency, both soldiers were discharged from the service. This was under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. They were both discharged under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy for engaging in homosexual behavior, and no criminal charges were ever pursued. The victim was discharged from the service for engaging in homosexual behavior. I contend that it is likely in this case it was never properly investigated and adjudicated because the commander had religious biases towards homosexual activity, and that his biases prevented him from treating this particular case as a subject-victim situation worthy of investigation. I have, over a 29, almost 30-year career, I have 100 of these cases, 200 of these examples I could throw out. Obviously, we don't have time for that, and we don't want to do that anyway. But As I've been conducting my research, and this is not just anecdotal research, I have access to actual case reports and hard data. As I've been conducting my research, I see the same pattern of behavior again and again. Most members of the military are Christian. Therefore, most commanders are Christian. And it has been well documented there is a strongly religious culture through the officer ranks where officers are pressured to conform to Christian beliefs and actions. I've looked into dozens of incidents to get ready for this and even more beyond that. And even with the current push within the military to advocate for victims and to properly investigate allegation, it still goes sideways when the command leadership and prosecutorial decisions are made by religious commanders who allow their biases to influence their decision making. Why should any of this matter to anybody outside of the military? I believe, of course, it should matter. I am willing to bet that in any given crowd, including this one, there are people who have served, or who know people who have served, or you love somebody who has served or is serving now. When senior officers leave the service, they often enter into influential and lucrative jobs in industry, politics, and education. And these are the same people who make decisions, set policies, and make laws that affect all of us. Therefore, the military's problems are our problems, and the path towards prevention starts with identifying and eliminating root causes, including causes driven by these religious biases. That pretty much concludes the formal part of my talk. I threw a lot of stuff out there. Since we have a little bit of time, I'll take some questions in a minute, but just to lighten it up a little bit, if y'all don't mind, I'll throw out a couple of remembrances about what it's like to live here in Texas as a military, or not as a military, as an atheist in Texas. Beth Presswood mentioned a couple things that triggered these memories. When she mentioned Chick tracts, not that long ago, somebody comes knocking on my door out in the country and they say to me, would you like to come to our church? We're opening up a new church a few blocks away. Would you like to come to church? And because I tend to lean towards kinder, gentler atheism compared to my partner, Dave Silverman, he's the yin, I'm the yang, something along those lines. I said, no thank you, I appreciate the invite, but I'm not religious, so I appreciate it, but no thank you. And I started to close the door, and she puts her foot in the door, and she says, well, how certain are you you're going to go to heaven when you die? And I looked at her, and I looked at her foot, and I looked back at her, and I said, oh boy, game's on. And before we were done, about 15 minutes later, she had a pack of Chick tracts in her hand. She threw them at me, and they fluttered around me like little butterflies while she went running off down the sidewalk. I love Chick tracts. I used to collect them when I was a teenager because I thought they were hilarious. And the other thing Beth said that reminded me of something about employment and coming out as an atheist in your job is my husband's an atheist. He's an IT guy. He hasn't really come out at work. It hasn't really come up, but he hasn't come out at work and wasn't really planning on coming out of work. And then we went to the atheist community of Austin's bat cruise, the last cruise that they had. And we come strolling into the lobby of the Hilton, and one of my husband's co-workers is standing in there with his wife, in the lobby. And it was so funny. My husband and his co-worker had this 15-minute conversation trying to figure out if the other one was there for the atheist bat cruise, without either one of them having to come out and say, I'm here for the atheist bat cruise. So they kind of outed each other, and it tickled me. All right, that's the formal part. What are your questions? Comments?
When a woman is raped, a lot of times I assume there's a pregnancy. What happens there? Is abortion available?
Abortion paid for by the military is actually prohibited in military law. You gotta go seek care off post, and it doesn't matter what the cause is, at least as it is applied to the Army.
So then they just go ahead and have the baby while they're still in service?
Oh, you can have the baby still in service. Now, I personally don't know any individual who's become pregnant from rape while in the service. I just know they can't expect to get an abortion through military care. So for the rest of it, I don't know. I'm assuming if they don't get an abortion, they have them. But they have the option of going, if they're in an area where abortion hasn't been restricted to the point of being inaccessible, then they can get an abortion. But yeah, I hadn't even looked into that angle. You just gave me a whole other area to look into.
Yes.
Oh, she's bringing a mic.
Oh, nice. I'll wait. Yes, it is a very rampant problem, and in your experience, what do you think will solve that? I know we're also on the fight of having humanist chaplains in the military. Do you think that will help counteract a lot of the religious tendencies in there?
Well, I hope so, because what we're doing so far isn't making any kind of a real dent to the problem at all. It's the one thing we haven't tried. So I hope so. You know, it's kind of a funny thing with the chaplain system, because up until real recently, just within the last few years, if say you were having a problem with somebody harassing you or sexually harassing you or something like that, and you didn't want to take it all out in public, if you needed counseling or some other kind of intervention, you could go see a chaplain, and they're all religious right now because we haven't yet brought in a humanist chaplain. You could go see a chaplain with an expectation of privacy, but you couldn't go see an actual secular professional with the same expectation of privacy because they retained a duty to report to the commander, back to the commander, if they thought you were going to be, your performance was going to be hurt or you were going to in danger of hurting yourself or others or anything. But the point is you had no expectation of privacy or confidentiality unless you went to the chaplain. And until about 5 years ago, you could lose your security clearance if you went any place but the chaplain. Although, because you had to disclose, you went to see a secular counselor, but you didn't have to disclose, you went to see a chaplain. That has changed in the last few years, but change comes slow to the military, and you know, it is what it is. It comes slow. It is hard to see. I see a hand there and a hand there.
Hold on, he has a microphone back there.
Yeah, sorry. Got a microphone. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. I just wanted to ask you about the law that was proposed in the fight that occurred between Senators Gillibrand and Mikulski about the sexual assault law. So would you say that it would have been better if the commander's authority had been taken away from them? And the second thing is, can you clarify the role of warrant officers in the military? I'm
Sure.
confused between the enlisted ranks and the officer corps from lieutenant up.
Yeah, I'll do that first. Enlisted soldiers are soldiers who enlist directly in the service, and they do the nuts and bolts of work and things like that in the service. Commissioned officers are the leaders and the commanders, and then the warrant officers fall kind of in between. Usually they're the special technicians. They're the helicopter pilots and things along those lines. Most of my experience is with the Army, so I'm talking about Army rank schedule structure. The other thing he was asking about is there's a push on now to remove prosecutorial jurisdiction from commanders to actual legal people, lawyers, to make decisions whether or not there's enough evidence to go forward with a trial on a case. So far the proposal is to limit that to sexual assaults. My personal impression or my personal opinion is I don't think any of those decisions should be made by commanders. Whether it's sexual assault or any other case, my personal opinion is that it needs to be made by legal professionals, like it is out out there in the world, at least for felonies, whatever the felony happens to be, because I've seen it over and over, bias, and especially when the subject and the victim are in the same unit. It happens all the time.
Further, I'd like to go expound a little bit more on what you were just saying. Why is there so much pushback? I'm not familiar with code of honor, I guess, as far as there being civilian oversight in the military for cases of sexual assault.
Because commanders argue that they have to have absolute control over their unit, because if they don't have absolute control over the health, welfare, and morale of their unit, that they will lose what they call combat effectiveness. I think they're full of crap, personally. I've never been a commander, but I think they're full of crap. It's the same thing they said when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was being repealed, that they were losing control of their units and it would affect combat readiness. It's been 3 years now. That's turned out to be complete nonsense.
Thank you.
When were you separated?
2008.
Well, I was drafted in '65 for the Vietnam buildup, and I ended up in the Army Intelligence from '65 to '70.
There's oxymoron right there.
And I became a draft dodger right away and enlisted. But I can't believe how much proselytizing I hear goes on now. Is that true?
Oh, it's so true. It's so true, and it's continuous, and it tends to get a little better the more rank you have when you start to learn the system and you can protect yourself a little bit. But yeah, it was worse earlier in my career. It got really bad after September 11th, and we all went all God and country, patriot, America there for a while, and then it slacked off a little bit. But yeah, it's still a problem. It actually got a lot better in the years leading up to September 11th, and then after that, it went back in the hole. And it's only now, just with we may really soon actually have a humanist chaplain. That wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. So it's coming. Change is coming.
I was never proselytized the whole time I've been here.
I was proselytized from the first day I came in, and they wouldn't let me have atheist on my dog tags.
Wow. Thank you.
So my question was, you mentioned briefly that one of the ways in which we still have ground to cover, room for improvement, is that you said there's still discrimination against transgendered individuals. And I was wondering, you just mentioned that very briefly. I was wondering if you could briefly describe, I guess, some of the more specifics, because I haven't heard specifics about how transgendered are treated or discriminated against in the military.
Yeah, right now, transgendered aren't allowed to serve at all. They're not allowed to enlist or join the service in any way. And if you're discovered to be transgendered, after you're already in the service, you're immediately discharged.
Thank you.
Okay, my question is, I don't disagree with you at all that the military is very God-soaked and proselytization-soaked, but the victim blaming you talked about is in the wider secular culture. I mean, it's infiltrated in our culture. Can you talk about if you think it's worse because it's religious, or is it just the same old victim blaming that we see normally?
I think what makes it maybe perhaps worse in some ways within the military is because of the whole captive part of it. When you're in the military and you're in a unit, you have to follow the orders of other people. And I think in some ways, and plus sometimes, like a couple of these cases I talked about, we're in the combat zones and on small forward operating bases in the combat zones. The victim blaming is horrible in the civilian world. In some cases, in many cases, it's horrible in the military world. But a lot of times when it happens in the military world, the victim's got no place to go. And sometimes in the military world, the commander who controls their world is also one of the perpetrators who allows the harassment and the victimization to go on. I cannot, if you've never been in the military, I cannot underestimate or understate the control a commander can have over somebody's life, especially when deployed in one of the combat zones.
So, one of the facets of modern sexism, which my question's similar to hers, is victim blaming. Victim blaming is one of the symptoms of modern sexism. And my question to you is, how much of modern sexism is based on religion? How much of it is based on something else?
I think a lot of it, I mean, I wouldn't have any way to know. I've never done any study. A lot of it's religiously based, I believe. A lot of it's based on other factors, sexism or whatever, but there's a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of ways sexism, and a lot of forms of sexism are religiously based. So when I started digging into these military cases, I've never dug into civilian cases because I don't have access to anything other than some anecdotes out there. But when I dug into these military cases and you had the victim blaming, and a lot of the rampant sexism in the military cases, at the root of them, there seemed to always be a Bible-thumping military commander right there.
Thank you.
In the previous question from a person that asked about the transgender being discharged, in other sex-related cases, would they be discharged as a dishonorable discharge?
No, actually, that is one area in which progress has been made over the years. The character of their service depends on the quality of their service. In the Army, transgenders are not being discharged for under dishonorable or anything. Years past, it used to be they would be investigated for fraudulent enlistment, and that would affect the character of their discharge. But in the past few years, the discharges that I know of have depended on the character of their service, and which is progress. It's a tiny little piece of progress, but it's progress.
Quickly, your hypothesis, have you had a chance to show it to the powers to be as far as the senators and so forth that were having to fight in making decisions, especially Senator Mikulski, who seems to be kind of on the commander's side in terms of giving them total control?
I have not, and actually, this is the first place I've thrown it out there to see what people thought of it. If I was just going in a weird direction or barking up the wrong tree. This is the first place where I've tried this theory on for size. And I'm still gathering data. It's still a work in progress. I still have a lot more cases to review. And you know, the easy part for me is getting access to the cases and reviewing what happened in the cases and the outcome of the cases. The harder part is finding out anything about the commanders. And I go to open source for that. There's Facebook and social media, and I'm working on methodology for developing a correlation. I suspect there's a correlation. I've got plenty of anecdotal evidence that indicates me there's a correlation, but I'm still working on the science.
My daughter actually wants to go to the military. So my question for you is, in your opinion, what are the things that need to change in terms of better taking care of sexual assault cases, and if those changes are going to be made anytime soon?
You know, I'm going to answer that with actually I don't know, because we have tried different things, different training, and we still have the problem. Really, my personal opinion of it, the only thing that's going to change is change the religious culture of the military and the religious biases that come in from that. And that is a years-long, tough road to hoe. I do want to say, though, you know, I brought up these cases and everything, but I would not necessarily discourage anybody from serving in the military. It was a good career for me, and I did well in the military. And plenty of people do well. And despite all the attention that this issue sometimes gets in the military, it's still a relative minority. Most people, men and women, serve their entire careers and don't have these sort of problems. But when you do have these problems in a unit, they eat the unit like a cancer. They eat the morale, they eat effectiveness, and they just ruin everything positive about serving in the military. And there's plenty of positives.
So, I think there are some things in society that are going to change, and then that's going to change the military afterwards. But it may be the case that we can go in reverse too. For example, if men are forced to serve under women, it may change their attitudes, and this propagates out. I think the Christian right may have stumbled upon this, which is why they have tried to infuse themselves into the military at every opportunity and take over, cadet training and inject this Christianity only. Is it perhaps in our best interest to borrow from their tactics and try to change the military towards a more secular humanist view in the hopes that that spills out into society?
I think that would be an excellent direction to try to go in, and here's why. We have some actual examples from the past. You look at the military was one of the first big organizations to integrate race-wise. I mean, fully integrate. The military was integrated long before large parts of the United States were integrated as far as living and employment and things like that. For all the fact that we've had military restrictions on women serving in combat roles, still, women have been in military units and their role has been expanding continuously, including into those command roles. We have more and more women moving up there. So it's worked. Those attitudes have filtered out into the world. So yeah, that's a long answer to say yeah.
That's it.
That's it. All right, I'm done. Thank you very much, and thank you for your questions.